So the first premise of Singer's argument states that suffering and death from lack of food, shelter, and medical care are bad. Let's suppose I asked why. Why are these things bad? Or why does Peter Singer conclude so definitively that these things are bad? And I think that the quick answer is that these things are bad because they're bad for everyone. That is to say, that any person or any sentient being who experiences lack of food, lack of shelter, or lack of medical care, or care in general, will suffer because of it. Um, the, the main principle, moral principle that underlies this idea is one that is important, and it's a principle that we'll come back to a few times over the semester. This principle is called the principle of equal consideration of interests. Equal consideration of interests. And essentially, what this principle states is that if a being has interests, such as an interest in avoiding suffering, then those interests must be considered equally, that is, equally to one's own interests. Another way of thinking about this is that your own interests do not matter more or have more value, more weight attached to them just because they're your own. Other people's interests or other sentient beings' interests are equally valuable. They hold equal weight as your own. And so when you're making moral decisions or decisions that have an impact on multiple sentient beings, then you must consider all sentient beings and all interests that are affected equally. Okay, that's the principle of equal consideration of interests. Peter Singer brings up the golden rule when discussing this first premise. And I think that we can make sense of the golden rule by way of the principle of equal consideration of interests. So the golden rule says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Treat others the way you want to be treated. That makes sense primarily because you and others share the same general interests. We might say that our general interests are to obtain happiness and pleasure and to avoid suffering and pain. That's why we should treat others the way we want to be treated, because fundamentally we are equal. We have equal interests. And this is why Peter Singer can definitively conclude in premise one, or I should say definitively state in premise one, that lack of food, shelter, and medical care and suffering from these things are bad. Suffering is bad for anyone, for anything that can experience it.